In this presentation, we are going to take a look at how interpreters can balance ethical responsibilities with advocating. We're going to start by defining advocacy in healthcare so that we can better understand what advocacy entails in a healthcare setting, especially for patients facing linguistic and cultural barriers. We're going to also once again describe the interpreter's primary role, the core function, which is to deliver accurate, impartial communication, and how this informs all professional responsibilities. We'll take a look at some ethical guidelines to take a look at specifically key principles from the National Code of Ethics and the CHIA Code of Ethics that help guide the interpreter's conduct as it relates to advocacy. We're going to determine when advocacy is appropriate for the interpreter by applying specific criteria to decide whether advocacy is warranted, and we're going to evaluate best practices when we choose to advocate. So let's start by defining advocacy. Advocacy in healthcare refers to actions taken by healthcare professionals to support, protect, and empower patients in navigating the healthcare system. This can include ensuring that patients understand their rights, providing information on available resources, addressing inequities and barriers that could get in the way of a patient's ability to receive appropriate care. Advocacy is especially significant when patients encounter language, cultural, or socioeconomic barriers. By taking steps to mitigate or work through these barriers, healthcare professionals can promote equity and help ensure that all patients receive the care they need. Now, healthcare interpreters play a unique role in patient advocacy. The interpreter's primary responsibility to ensure accurate, complete, and transparent communication is by nature an action towards equality and equity. The interpreter's core job serves not only as a linguistic duty, but also as a fundamental action that promotes equality and equity in healthcare. But occasionally, interpreters can find themselves in situations where a critical piece of information that poses an immediate threat to the patient's well-being is missed or misunderstood. In these situations, interpreters may consider stepping outside of their primary role and into the role of advocate. Now, the key word here is consider. And really, what the interpreter will have to do is evaluate the situation to determine whether intervening and stepping out of the interpreter role and into the advocate role is appropriate. First, let me clearly state that even if, as an interpreter, you identify a problem, you may not be the right person to address it. After your initial evaluation to identify whether a problem even exists, you need to evaluate whether the interpreter is the right person to address the problem or it should be addressed by someone else. The most important and useful concepts for this step are respect for the autonomy of the participants in the encounter and the role and scope of the professional interpreter. Considering these two concepts will allow you to recognize the type of situations that are appropriate for interpreters to intervene and advocate and those that are not. Now let's take a look at some of the barriers, obstacles, situations where an interpreter could consider advocating. Let's take a look first at linguistic barriers. These are language-related barriers that can prevent the patient from understanding treatment options, for example. Cultural barriers can happen if a provider overlooks critical cultural factors that may negatively impact a patient's healthcare access or outcome. And when a patient's right to informed consent or refusal of treatment is compromised, this can be another type of barrier. Here's an example. An interpreter is at an encounter involving a doctor and Basma, an Arabic-speaking patient. During the appointment, the two discuss treatment options for a condition Basma has been newly diagnosed with. The doctor outlines various procedures, sometimes using complex medical terminology, while Basma nods politely, not wanting to interrupt. And even though the interpreter has guided the doctor to speak directly to the patient, the interpreter notices that the doctor looks at the interpreter while he is delivering the information. When the provider asks if Basma understands, she hesitates but says she does. The interpreter suspects that Basma has not fully grasped the treatment's potential risks and benefits, and suspects that the doctor has missed nonverbal cues like Basma's facial expressions, posture, and hesitancy that could have clued him in on Basma's uncertainty. In this situation, it is possible that the doctor's use of technical medical terms may have caused a linguistic barrier that is preventing Basma from truly comprehending her options. The interpreter also has cause to reason that the provider may have missed part of what Basma was communicating with her body language due to the fact that the doctor was focusing on the interpreter instead of the patient, and has misunderstood Basma's reluctance to ask questions due to cultural norms as a sign that she understands what was explained to her. Recognizing this, the interpreter may decide to advocate within professional and ethical guidelines, of course, to ensure the provider realizes Basma's confusion. Now, what does that look like? The interpreter can share her concern with both the doctor and Basma to ensure transparency. The concern being that some information may have been missed due to the use of technical terms, and can then offer to facilitate, not explain, but to facilitate additional clarification if the doctor or Basma would like to rephrase key information in simpler terms. The interpreter can once again encourage both participants to look and address each other as if the interpreter wasn't there. This can help Basma make a genuinely informed decision about her care. Even though you might agree with the interpreter that this is a good case for stepping into the advocate role. Both the National Code of Ethics for Healthcare Interpreters and the CHIA Code of Ethics emphasize that advocacy should be undertaken with caution and only when other avenues are not readily available or effective. Okay, so in the slide, when is advocacy appropriate for an interpreter? Number one, we had described the types of issues that can arise. In the second slide, titled When is Advocacy Appropriate for an Interpreter, we looked at the types of barriers that issues can cause. But to decide to act or not, to advocate or not, ask yourself these questions. Is the patient's health or safety immediately at risk? Will your intervention solve the problem or create more complications? As you answer this question, consider the possible unintended consequences your actions can have. Is there another professional, such as a social worker or patient advocate, that is better positioned to address this issue? Remember that accurate, impartial communication remains an interpreter's primary function. Why is it so important that interpreters carefully consider when and how to advocate? Because of the potential risks and negative outcomes that can be the result of stepping out of the interpreter's primary role and into the advocate role, including role confusion, which is when interpreters step beyond communication facilitation, such as taking on duties typically handled by social workers or legal advocates. That can blur boundary lines, and that confusion may undermine the interpreter's perceived objectivity or credibility. Increased liability, taking on responsibilities beyond the interpreting role, could create legal or professional liabilities. Healthcare interpreters are not typically licensed or insured to provide specialized services outside of communication. And even if you are, when you are working in the role, in a position of an interpreter, you still need to stick to that scope and that role, those boundaries. Loss of trust and objectivity is another risk. Interpreters are expected to remain impartial. If they advocate in ways that appear to favor one party over another, patient or provider, it may damage trust and hinder effective communication. Some main takeaways from this presentation. Ultimately, effective advocacy requires careful judgment and a strong understanding of an interpreter's professional boundaries. By balancing the need to uphold ethical standards with the goal of preventing serious harm, interpreters can help create an environment where language barriers do not compromise patient care.